EBV is Epstein-Barr virus, and it's the virus that we typically tie to a mono infection.
When we say that 10 to 12% of EBV has a turnover rate to ME/CFS, I mean that if you actually go to the doctor as an adult and you get tested for EBV and it's positive, you've got a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to have ME/CFS.
Today, we are going to be tackling the subject of ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. We're going to talk about POTS. We're going to talk about viral reactivation. And in order to do so, I have a very special guest. It is Jaime Seltzer. She is the scientific director of the nonprofit organization MEAction. She is also an affiliate researcher at Stanford Medicine at Stanford University, and she is a person living with ME. So Jaime, thank you so much for taking your time, for being with us today. I know everybody is excited to hear from you. We've got a lot to talk about, but thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Haylie. Happy to be here.
It's when we were getting ready to get on, you had talked a little bit about, you were sharing with me some of the things about yourself and going through and living with ME yourself. And you had actually said it's a little bit of a POTS day. So I'd love to jump in and ask you to define for our community. It's so, I love this. It both brings me joy and breaks my heart. It brings me joy that there's so much conversation. It breaks my heart that we need to have this kind of conversation. But to start, can you kind of define for our community what POTS is?
Well, I'll zoom out a little bit and say what an infection-associated chronic illness is.
I love it.
Okay. So we have a wide variety of different diseases and disorders that can be triggered, or we sometimes say unmasked, by infection. Sometimes low-grade symptoms were something that the person experienced their whole lives, but it really doesn't become a disease or a disability until an infection worsens symptoms. Other times, it's like being struck by lightning. As far as you know, you're perfectly healthy one day, you have the disease after the infection the next. So POTS is such a disease. So is Long COVID, so is ME/CFS, MCAS, PANS, PANDAS. We've got a whole little basket of these guys.
Okay, I want to ask you a question really quick. When you talk about infection, you're not talking about like a dental infection. Are you talking about like a viral infection, like maybe when someone gets mono, or a childhood infection, or something of that nature?
It's a very good question. So we say infection associated because these diseases and disorders are often triggered by infection. And ME/CFS, we say about 80% of the time it's triggered by infection, usually, but not always, a viral infection. However, it does seem to be that any sufficient challenge or disturbance to the immune system can lead to these diseases. So you also see ME/CFS onset after a terrible car accident where there's a lot of physical trauma. You might see it after a pregnancy where there are sincere and profound immunological shifts as part of that. So we say associated because it is often associated, but we don't say caused by because it can be triggered by other events.
So can it also be toxic exposure?
It can be. Oh, yes. Yes. Fungal triggers are common. Bacterial triggers are common. And chemical exposures too, although there is a lot less research on that, but I've heard enough personal stories from individuals to believe that there's quite likely something to that. I would even say almost certainly something to that.
I always say, so I know we've talked a little bit with my own particular autoimmune disorder. I feel like being able to distill it back to where my immune system was no longer able to modulate correctly, or whatever the right verbiage is, was exposure. I was dumped, malathion was dumped on me, on my body. I was supposed to be in the house, but I was, always quite rebellious. And I know that just completely pivoted the way I handle my platelets and I modulate my immune system. And it was, kind of untangling that neuroinflammatory response in my body really led me to learning a lot about that. So you listed a whole bunch of things that can fall into that infection associated. I like that. Okay. Can you take me through each one just so that our community kind of understands a little bit about the difference. And again, I know that there's a million textbooks and research and journals on it, but can we just kind of go through this?
We can do the elevator pitch for you.
I love it. So let's start with POTS. Okay. I'm seeing so many young women affected by this right now. I mean, it's been crazy in our clinical experience. So talk to me a little bit about what that is, what POTS means and what it is.
Well, so POTS is actually a description of the body's response. So there might even be several mechanisms behind the manifestations of POTS, but we measure POTS by measuring an increase in the patient's heart rate from going from lying down to sitting up or sitting up to standing. In adults, if your heart rate jumps a little when you stand, that's normal. But in POTS, it will jump 30 beats per minute or more. So you go from 90, which feels like a normal walking around heart rate, to 120 in a couple minutes. And that feels very uncomfortable in the moment. So people who have experienced it know it's not something you would not notice. In adolescents and children, we look for 40 beats per more rising. But it is not obviously that one thing. That's just how we test for it.
Can it be blood pressure also? Do we see a fluctuation in blood pressure?
Not necessarily, but you can.
Okay.
Also, it's important to recognize that POTS is a kind of dysautonomia, and there are other kinds of dysautonomia. That means a malfunction of the autonomic nervous system. And we call POTS a kind of orthostatic intolerance. Orthostatic just means change in position.
Standing up, yeah.
Yes. So, but there are other kinds of orthostatic intolerance that aren't POTS. POTS is one of the most common manifestations of orthostatic intolerance that we're seeing after viral infection.
Okay,
so it is really common in young women.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm watching, edema in the ankles, blood, like their feet turning purple. Yeah. And then even a lot of GI issues, issues.
Sure. Because anything that affects blood flow, right? This is all about blood flow. The reason why your heart is suddenly pounding is that your body's recognizing that your blood isn't flowing like it needs to, and you're not getting enough oxygen where it needs to go, including to really important organs like the brain. So, you see cognitive impairment, you see dizziness, you see GI issues because the blood flow is something really necessary to digest properly. A bunch of blood is diverted to your digestive system to help you digest in a healthy body. So a lot of people do help control POTS, partially with diet, because decreasing carbohydrates will decrease the rate at which your blood pressure fluctuates, and therefore your beats per minute fluctuate, and also will decrease the amount of diversion of blood flow.
Yeah, I've even seen people that are using almost like compression.
I'm wearing them right now. Socks. Yeah.
And then even in the belly area, compression,
I've seen that before too. If you have digestive issues, that can be a little tougher because it can be uncomfortable. But definitely abdominal compression does help some people. I've known even people wearing arm compressors as well. I usually just wear compression socks up to below the knee, but to be clear, my POTS is not particularly severe.
Understood. That's wonderful. And you said a lot of times you see POTS post-viral. Do you think some of what we're seeing with a lot of our, I don't know, I have kids that are 22 and 26, and I just feel like we're sitting around the kitchen table and they're talking about this post-COVID. Can this be associated with long COVID also?
Oh, absolutely. I would even say that MECFS and POTS are the two most commonly associated consequences of what we're labeling long COVID. Long COVID, and I know we're kind of now diverging into that. Long COVID is really any long-term symptoms that take place after infection with SARS-CoV-2. So it covers a bunch. And it covers some things that are unique to the original triggering pathogen, like issues with sense of smell or taste, for example, that are quite particular, not unique, but particular to COVID.
Right.
But then you also see these more syndromic conditions arising, like POTS and MCAS and MECFS. And those three that I just mentioned are probably, it's hard to say whether they're the most common or the most well-recognized consequences of SARS-CoV-2 infection and long-term symptoms.
Hi, it's Haylie, your host. I know firsthand what it feels like to find real, impactful solutions to your struggles. And I know what it feels like to lose hope. We are being bombarded by toxins every single day. As a matter of fact, the world's largest single environmental health risk is air pollution. One thing that is becoming crystal clear is that environmental toxic burdens in our bodies must be addressed. Let me help you tackle toxic burden. Go to HayliePomroy.com/detox and download my free Detox Decoded Masterclass. Let's give you a fighting chance. I know what it feels like to lose hope, whether you're dealing with fatigue, mast cell activation, an autoimmune disorder, long COVID, viral reactivation, anxiety or depression, or inflammation. All of it can feel overwhelming. I will teach you nutrition and natural therapies to help your body eliminate toxins. I cannot wait to see you there. Again, that's HayliePomroy.com/detox.
So individuals like yourself that have been living with, studying, dedicating their life to, and I'm going to ask you about that, MECSF for decades now.
MECFS.
I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic, so I do that. My whole team,
everyone does cerebrospinal fluid. That's what it is. They're reading it. They're remembering their medical training and saying CSF. Yeah. No, it's very common.
I literally am dyslexic and that when it's letters like that and the F and the S just get me every time. But so I always tell myself chronic fatigue syndrome, and then I go back and say it right. But please grab me and help me. When we saw COVID come on, do you think, I mean, I know now there's this strong correlation because of the chronic inflammatory response, but also the body's inability to get itself re-regulated, right? It's like something knocks it off and it just can't get back into the natural homeostasis. So it creates a new homeostasis of dysfunction. Right. How quickly did we start to see that correlation? Did we, like when the virus came out, did we go, uh-oh, this is going to be a trigger? Or did we start to see the symptoms?
Okay. No, we did.
Talk to me about that. What was that like?
It was absolutely devastating. It's like watching a train about to hit people tied to the tracks. You know it's coming. You know the magnitude. I mean, we absolutely knew it was coming in the chronic illness world. We knew that MECFS-like patterns of symptoms had arisen after other coronaviruses like MERS and SARS-1.
Yes.
So, and moreover, we knew that coronaviruses were particularly virulent in this manner. EBV has a turnover rate to MECFS of 10 to 12%.
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm going to stop you. Tell me what in the world that means. I just
mono. You mentioned mono.
Yeah, no, mono has. What do you mean by a turnover rate?
So
and EBV, guys. I just want everybody to know EBV is Epstein-Barr virus, and it's the virus that we typically tie to a mono infection.
Right. So EBV is to mono, like SARS-CoV-2 is to COVID-19 disease. Right.
Got it.
Okay. So when we say that 10 to 12% of EBV has a turnover rate to MECFS, I mean that if you actually go to the doctor as an adult and you get tested for EBV and it's positive, you've got a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to have MECFS.
Wow. That's crazy. Okay. I love you saying that. I love what you do, and I love the backing that you have and the background that you have. I just want our community to hear this, because so many people that have finally had this diagnosis after 10 to 20 to 50 doctors and being misdiagnosed, that there is a 1 in 10 chance of manifesting a dysregulation in the autonomic nervous system, an inflammatory system, in the immune system. When we have this, where people just kind of brush this off and say, well, you had it, we've all been exposed to it.
And it should be over it, so it's fine. Yeah.
Right.
And right. So back to the original thread. So we knew that MERS and SARS had a higher turnover rate. And so we were absolutely devastated. You know, the EBV studies are a little bit more solid. I mentioned 10 to 12. There's like a study with 8%, a study with 9%, a study with 10, 2 studies with like about 11, a study with 12. So, you know, I can say 10 to 12% and feel pretty certain of that.
Right.
But with MERS and SARS, 1 study each, very low numbers of patients, but still with figures we're looking more like 25 to 33%.
Wow.
So it was, and you're beginning to grasp, right? Like, think about how fast it was traveling, how many people had it, how we didn't have a vaccine yet. And we're sitting here knowing what's going to happen next, begging our government, like, please pay attention to this. This is going to be a majority chronically ill nation if you sit on your thumbs.
And you said it's like watching people about to get hit by a train. Well, to the tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to stick with me forever. So in our clinic, right, at the Institute, you know, we were really quick acting in what we had, you know, and Dr. Klimas and the team had studied and researched for decades about how to, you know, everything from pacing to low-dose naltrexone to vitamin C, you know, to natural anti-inflammatories, to herbals, to osteopathic manipulation, you know, all the things that have been employed in supporting a body to try to climb back into a state of homeostasis, right, with either chronic infection or sometimes, you know, if the virus is gone or they think the virus is gone or part of it's gone,
we can zip on all that. Hold on to that thought. Let's finish your sentence.
Put a pin right there. Yeah. It's like, you know, all these things that we did to support, we were, you know, really trying to support the patient going through COVID. And this whole, you know, it's going to be 7 to 10 days, 14 days in the beginning, and then we're all, you know, one and done. We're all one and done. I mean, we are flooded with individuals now that are still trying to re-regulate, if not are in a terrible state, post-COVID original infection, let alone if they've gotten it. We have some that have it, you know, 5, 6, 9 times. Or do they have it 9 times, or is it reactivated? We are pondering that. So
I do want to interject too, to kind of echo what you're saying. MEAction, my parent organization, you know, as the scientific director there, knowing the implications of what was happening, we started producing materials before Long COVID had its name, because we did know. We did put out a disinformation guide about what the kind of messaging people were likely to hear during the pandemic and how to tell good information from bad information. We also put out the pacing guide, and I'm talking, this was like, I think March 2020, which was a guide to, for those who are listening who might not be familiar with symptom contingent pacing, it is managing your activities so that you do not overdo it, resting ahead of planned activities, and not exacerbating your condition. It's we kind of contrast it with graded exercise, where there's the presumption that these diseases are just diseases of deconditioning, and if you work hard enough, you should get well again. All of us living with this disease, and all of us who research these diseases, we know that that's not true. But unfortunately, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when you believe that exercise is a cure-all, you think you can apply it in any and all directions and it will fix whatever ails you.
Right. And it's interesting. I think one thing that is so important to Dr. Klimas when we decided to do this podcast, and the whole team, whether it's our research team, our clinical team, or our, you know, education piece, everybody was adamant that we let people know, first and foremost, we believe you. Right. So that whole, are you sure what you have? Maybe it's all in your head, you know, just get more rest, just exercise more. I don't know, eat less carbs, eat more carbs, whatever it is. We want people to not even have to worry about that conversation. right, when they come to the table.
I think hope in medicine that every clinician and researcher would stand by that, and the fact that they don't always is their failure and nothing to do with the patient.
Thank you for saying that. And they don't. I mean, our community talks about being medically gaslit. I mean, there's all kinds of terms being thrown around. We try to just say, look, you're here now. You don't have to, we believe you. You walk through the doors, our goal is to give you hope and help and tidbits and resources, but you don't have to convince us of anything. The research is there, the science is there. So that's unfortunately, it's a gift to the patient. And
it's wonderful that those patients feel supported in that way, but it's also, it's an absolute indictment. And, the idea that that's something special is really worrying to me, especially given how much information is out there on long COVID in publications like JAMA and Nature. This is not right. Patients may feel marginalized because of doctors who can't keep up. But I want to emphasize on this call that is not the norm. It should not be accepted as the norm.
Or just because it's common. Yeah. Because it's common doesn't make it normal and doesn't make it right. Just because it's common doesn't make it right. Yeah. So we can't just work ourselves out of these conditions. We can't just try harder, knuckle down. Okay. And we even can't rest ourselves out of these conditions, it seems. So,
well, not quite, although learning to pace and learning when to rest can definitely increase your functional capacity. It's one of those things that is like a knot where the harder you pull, the tighter the knot pulls.
Right.
If you can relax, the knot will loosen a little and give you a little bit more room. And that's why we say pacing is a good management strategy. It's not going to cure you, but you may very well feel better on a day-to-day basis every day if you pace well. I always add when I say things like that it can become very challenging, next door to impossible for very severe patients to pace. They still do in their own way, but they may not see gains. It may be more like just being able to feel 5% more comfortable moment to moment.
Tell me, just distill down for me, for everybody out there listening, what exactly is pacing? We use it in the clinic all the time. People that are well versed in chronic fatigue syndrome, even I think in COVID, long COVID, are starting to become well versed in it. But for everybody listening, what is pacing?
Pacing is being active when you're able and resting when you're tired and not going beyond your limits.
Nice.
And it may also involve radical rest before long activities. So perhaps, you have a wedding this summer and you really want to attend and you have minor or moderate ME. You could stay mostly in bed, just getting up to putter and keeping your blood flowing the day before, and you're going to have a much nicer day the next day.
Right.
What people may not understand about the payback that people with ME/CFS and the majority of people with long COVID get when they overdo it is that the payback is disproportionate to the original effort. It is not worsened fatigue or next day muscle soreness or whatever healthy people kind of try to conceptualize. It really is a pathological state with a bunch of symptoms at once. So I conceptualize it like sepsis or diabetic ketoacidosis. It is a pathological state that involves a bunch of different symptoms. Probably the one that is most common and most obvious is that it's difficult to initiate movement to the point that a patient that is in post-exertional malaise, or we might say who has crashed, might even have trouble turning over in bed the day after. They go for what we would consider for our healthy audience to be a very simple event or activity.
And it's, to me, it's amazing. We're lucky. We're so fortunate that we have, I call them in-house labs, but an incredible lab. And so sometimes we'll pull a patient in when they're in the middle of the crash so that we can actually look at their immune system. We can look at the B cells and the T cells and their cytokines. Everybody learned about the cytokine storm, right, during COVID initial infection. We look at those cytokines, and sometimes they'll be in a storm type setting when an individual's gone to a wedding, when an individual has attended their kid's graduation, and they have a phenomenal, a phenomenal immune response post what would be considered a normal activity for a healthy individual. So it's not just that their muscles are tired or their brain is tired. There is an actual immunological response that happens when the body gets pushed too far. And so it's like that regulatory system can't say, it's a wedding, you might be a little stretchy, itchy, tired the next day. We've seen like actual immune storms as if there was an acute infection present. It's shocking to me. I mean, I know that you have had so much exposure. When I first stepped into the space, I was like, we're looking at flow cytometry and cytoflows on individuals that have done very, daily activities, and they look like someone that has a raging acute infection.
I think it's important to point out too, right, that this is part of the reason why more activity is not a treatment. Right. Activity is what we use to provoke the symptoms and to provoke the pathology, the signs of pathology that we use to study the illness. So just doing more and more activity is not going to help. I usually use the metaphor, it's like telling a type 2 diabetic that if they ate a slightly bigger pile of sugar every day, they would no longer have diabetes eventually. It just does not work like that.
Right. But again, we get to see, although the patients for decades have been communicating their symptom profile, we get to see the lab. And I think that takes the emotionality out of it. And it allows some individuals that need to lean into that part of science to have more conviction or feel more validated. So I love that we can do that. So
I like being more validated, not just feeling more validated. I want to add one more thing though, because I think it's really important to the whole pathology aspect. One of the things that we talk about in MECFS, and again in Long COVID if they have PEM as well, is something called the 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test. So most sick people, and generally all well people, if you have them do 2 days of an exercise challenge in a row, the second day they typically do as well or better than on the first day. But people with ME have the opposite response. They perform worse on the second day. And I say perform, but I want our listeners to know it's not voluntary. What is being measured is gases in the blood to determine the rate of metabolism and, how fast are the cells making energy and that kind of thing. And people with ME fade on day 2. And that's another way that we objectively observe the effects of post-exertional malaise. We do not recommend that test because it's so hard on patients, but it has been used to as evidence of disability on SSDI.
What I was just going to ask you, which is great, is what types of things can people get adequate diagnostics? There's a lot of the lean testing for POTS, the 2-day cardiovascular stress test, which again, that's really hard on a body that's already struggling. But sometimes it's necessary to get people the help that they need to get an adequate diagnosis. In your advocacy work, do you point people to certain clinics, certain doctors? Like, tell me a little bit about the resources there.
Okay, so I would say that when it comes to ME, the best diagnostic is talking to the patient about their activity and their response to activity, to be perfectly honest. And I think that part of the reason why the symptom-based information is not considered as good is simply because many medical providers are not familiar with the nature of PEM. It is the type of thing where once you've heard a handful of patients describe it, I don't believe you would ever mistake it for anything else ever again.
Got it.
I mean, I feel like it's pretty unique. And so that is how I think it ought to be diagnosed.
So, and just so everybody knows, PEM is post-exertional
malaise.
And
malaise is that feeling that you get when you're fluey and sick and dragging and you feel kind of poisoned. A lot of people may not like that if it's feels an old-fashioned word to them, but it is very descriptive of the experience. Sometimes people say post-exertional, oh no, I'm going to screw it up if I try to come up with all the different acronyms. When people don't like a name, they invent new names, unfortunately, and then we end up with a big old basket of things. Yeah, that not everybody uses. Yeah, I think that feeling of being weighted down after activity, not being able to think clearly after activity. Some people will say gravity is stronger.
I had a client that said, I feel like I drank like really gross liquors, like you would drink, cheap liquor, way too much. There's a wet blanket on me. Somebody hit me. They put a bunch of bars of soap in a pillowcase and hit me with it while I slept. I mean, the description of all these, like these visuals, and I just go, got it. Like that's, I get that. So with your organization, what is your mission? You have provided so many resources to so many people, but first let me ask you this. What personally drives you? Why are you doing this?
I want this disease to be just as manageable as any other metabolic chronic illness. And I believe that it will happen in my lifetime, and I will believe that I will be part of why it happens.
Okay.
I think that it is, people say this disease is very complex. It's not more complex than other diseases that have FDA-approved management interventions. I'm not thinking we're going to snap our fingers and cure this tomorrow, but I believe we're going to get to a place where the average person living with ME has 2 or 3 prescription drugs that they take regularly, has a few dietary and lifestyle modifications, and lives basically an ordinary life.
Nice. I love that. And I think it's so hard to get adequate treatment when we still don't have adequate acknowledgement of it. You and I are I'm in a space where from work, where everybody, all of my colleagues, everybody that I work with is so on board with finding treatment and cures. And, we're just have already gone through the door of, is this or isn't it? Out in the world, we get letters and emails constantly from individuals that say, I went to my doctor and they said that doesn't even exist. We had somebody that said it's not even in the manual of medicine. There's not even a formulary for it. Literally last week.
There's a diagnostic code. I mean, honestly, this is an issue of people not wanting to learn new things. Right. This disease
but that's what the patient deals with.
Sure. Yeah. But I will say that, so this year we're doing, I suppose I should back up and say what we did last year. So MEAction was founded as a grassroots advocacy organization providing technological tools to enable people who are very ill and disabled to advocate for themselves and in groups. So we were using Slack and video conferencing before Slack and video conferencing was cool. And we connected people from all around the world to fight together for better research funding and better clinical care, and for better recognition, in all arenas of life. And we began to host what we called Millions Missing. Millions Missing represents the number of people with ME who can't show up in public life because they're too ill. In this disease, 25% of people are housebound or bedbound.
Wow. Say that again. What percentage?
25%. So 1 out of 4 of people living with ME are housebound or bedbound.
Okay.
And only about 13% can work full-time. So this is a severe disease. The median quality of life is below that of any disease to which I know it has been compared, including chronic kidney failure, many kinds of cancer, multiple sclerosis. And part of that is because it does not have FDA-approved treatments, and there's not a lot of medical education. So a couple of years ago, I got to know folks at the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine. I gave a plenary talk, I think it was 2021, on the connection between the pandemic and infection-associated chronic illness. And subsequently, I applied for a seed grant in conjunction with Mayo Clinic Rochester clinicians, Dr. Stephanie Grach and Dr. Ravindra Ganesh, and we got the funding. So over the next year, we produced a new diagnostic and treatment algorithm within Mayo Clinic. They have something called Ask Mayo Expert, where they have such things. And every Mayo clinician at any site can access it and know what to do. It has information about severe ME. And also, even if you're outside that system, you can subscribe. Your clinic can subscribe.
So tell me what they would subscribe to.
I think that the service that you would subscribe to would be called Ask Mayo Expert. It's one word.
Okay. Yes. Ask Mayo Expert. We actually just recently had an experience with that. We were in a hospital setting in Arizona, and the emergency room doc actually logged into that. So it's just very interesting.
That's wonderful to hear, honestly. It's something that might be, even though it's not the most broadly seen, the diagnostic and treatment algorithm might be one of the things I'm most proud of having produced in my career. And we also produced a concise clinical review for MECFS. It's short for clinicians who are busy, 5 pages or less, but it's very rich. It has a lot of very useful information, and it has a 1-credit CME, continuing medical education, for doctors to learn more.
Is there something that the patient that's going in, so we have a lot of, we have an online community. In our community, a lot of people are always asking for resources to take to their own physician. They're going in for a doctor's visit. They want to schedule a doctor's visit, and they want to go in and have resources for them. Where would they find these kinds of resources that they could share?
I really do think that paper is the thing to hand your clinician. Okay. So if they search Mayo Clinic and they search my name, they will find the paper.
Okay. We will, in our blog post that goes with all of our podcasts, I will make sure I put the link in there, because I think that'll be a very important resource for everybody. That's wonderful. And how do people join MEAction? How can they get involved?
I do want to finish this story, because this
is where it's
headed, actually.
Yeah, I love it.
So I will say too that paper got an altmetric score in the 900s. That makes it probably one of the most popular and most accessed and most talked about papers of last year, in any domain. But where I was leading with this is that now we're starting this initiative at MEAction called Teach ME, Treat ME. And this month and next month and June mostly, we're having in-person medical education events at university hospitals and medical schools across the country with all of our state and local groups, and sometimes our international folks too. We're having an event at the Royal College at Edinburgh. And so those one-shot events are going to introduce the Mayo Clinic paper, where the audience is already clinicians, but we also have a flashcard deck for medical students within Anki flashcards that will cover information about infection-associated chronic illnesses. So that's what we'll be sharing at medical schools. And in association with that, we're engaging in longer-term partnerships to make products that will transform clinical care for MECFS and Long COVID at institutions across the country. Generally speaking, with products like the kind that we made at Mayo. Some of these are new Long COVID clinics and new MECFS clinics, which is really exciting.
So what I love is that you're going to the caregivers or the care providers and giving them better tools, better education, better resources. That's going to serve the patient or the person that's actually dealing with this. What can a person that's dealing with this today, how can they take action? How can they be involved or learn where they can be involved? You mentioned it was an acronyms that helps with disability and stuff. How do people, we have people that come in that have nowhere to turn and no history of how to handle this. They've gone about their lives. They've, been everything from, moms to teachers to surgeons, you name it. This is non-discriminatory, right?
Yeah.
And they got COVID and they're just hammered with something that they have no experience whatsoever. And again, a lot of times they're practitioners who don't, we're really in this amazing space where the people that we engage with are really well-versed. That's not common out there. What's the person that's listening's first step to get personally educated?
Okay. So I would say visit us at MEAction.net.
Okay.
That is the first thing to do. Sign up for our mailing list. We share information all the time. We have numerous resources on our website, including those pacing guides we talked about earlier. We have just a very short research review from 2019, right before the pandemic, and it summarizes kind of everything that you need to know, and it's in pretty easy to understand language. And we also have a clinician's search tool. Now, part of my job this year is to help us add more people to that list. And so I think we're going to be updating it a lot soon. But you can search by area and things like that to find out who's out there. I would say, too, that I want to give people reasonable hope in this, and that is that some of the institutions that are engaging with us, I cannot say their names yet until people sign on the dotted line or send me some official document of partnership, but I think our listeners would have trouble believing. It's quite incredible. This is an inflection point in medical care in these diseases. Things are changing. And now I just got to go find the funding to make sure that it's all going to actually happen, that everyone who comes to us who wants a partnership can get one.
I appreciate you saying that. When you said this is an inflection point, I actually got chills. I think if there was anything good of coming through this pandemic as a nation, but also globally, is we witnessed in real time a body respond to an infection, and the infection, again, we go back in virology, and we go back even in our immunology conversations on our advanced and our clinicals on Friday, and we talk about the fact that this was all supposed to clear within 10 to 14 days. And as long as we didn't have some sort of pulmonary response, it was supposed to clear. And I know, I see.
I'm sitting here shaking my head.
I know.
Like, we didn't believe that. I mean, I remember reading that and saying to myself, like, that's absurd. There's literally no reason to believe that's true, except that you really wish it were. That's the kind of thinking that has characterized the pandemic, is that people who, epidemiologists, researchers, immunologists, who should know better, virologists, they chose the conclusion that was the most likely to make people happy, including themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you don't know what to do, I don't know. I don't know. It's the conversations we sit in and, tear our hairs out, or, just have angst and anxiety and frustration over, is some of that,
wishful thinking.
Thank you. Wishful thinking. And now this sudden surprise, oh no, we have a sick patient, and it's like, yeah, we knew it was coming. Yeah. So, So I think, and again, it breaks my heart. I read all the, in our Facebook communities, I read all the comments, where people are still struggling. And so I know, I appreciate your time. One more little thing that I want to ask you about is, I'm watching the science, and I'm watching, and so I know I always feel like you're 10 steps ahead. And I think you have just an organic understanding and knowing, because it is real in your body. But you also have this incredible ability to distill down really complex issues and make them palatable, which is, I think, why you can be such a huge advocate. I love it. Are we thinking, and is it some of all of it, that the virus is never fully clearing, like most viruses don't, or that we're actually getting reinfected, or that it is clearing in some individuals, but the body isn't coming back into homeostasis?
This is a really good question, and I will outline the way that I think about these diseases. So I think that post-viral, and by that I don't mean the virus is gone per se, I mean after the acute infection phase is over, right? You have pathology from several sources, we could say there are sets of symptoms with distinct etiologies or sources, all right? So one of these is the original damage the infection did.
Right.
The examples I often use, sometimes you get liver damage with Epstein-Barr virus.
Absolutely.
Mono. Sometimes you get lung fibrosis after COVID. Those are a place where some symptoms can come from, right? and you have to deal with those. And in that case, it doesn't matter if the virus is there or not. You have to deal with those consequences. Then the next bucket is the symptoms of potentially lingering viral fragments or the whole virus, reactivating viruses. Multiple viruses hide out and reactivate under physiological stress. And then you also have co-infections. These infections that show up when the person has some degree of immunocompromise. These viruses you see in children whose immune systems are not very strong yet, and in people with diseases like AIDS, HIV, where there's immune exhaustion. So that is bucket number 2. And those are all sort of treated with similar approaches, if not identically. And then you have your final bucket, which is the immune, metabolic, and endocrine shifts, right, that are a fundamental adaptation to the original hit. And I don't know that any virus has to be there for that symptom set to exist. Right. That is what I would generally call MECFS.
Right.
And they have comorbidities that can be addressed separately.
It's interesting to me how you said with the first hit. So it's like the body can't get its bearing back after the original insult. And then
but I would even say that, like, you know how you said it's a different kind of homeostasis? I absolutely agree with that. I think that a lot of the changes that we see, and therefore, unfortunately, a lot of our incorrect therapeutic approaches are due to the fact that these are adaptive changes. I'm going to use some alternative medicine lingo. This is our body's wisdom, but it really is. It's like, this is how we survive and how our ancestors survived these infections long ago, is that they happen to have this or that trait that made this protein stop producing, because that is dependent on, the virus is dependent on that protein for replication. So guess what? You're not going to make any anymore. I mean, I'm being very general, but
right. But in the epigenetics or in the genomics aspect of it, we're seeing things turned on in bodies, right? And in we
didn't even get into genetics and epigenetics, but there's that too. Genetic susceptibility. There's an argument to be had regarding whether there's genetic susceptibility or if it's all epigenetics. This runs in my family. I lean on there is genetic susceptibility in these diseases as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And promise me you'll come back, because
come back.
Good, we'll come back. I want to talk just about the familial aspect. So I have autoimmune. My daughter got mono, but she got CMV mono. And then when she got COVID, she got all these co-infections. I mean, like, she had like 6 viral positive, IgM, like acute, like cock-sacking foot and mouth, but 3 different strains all at the same time. I mean, like, it was a reactivation or a co-infection or her immune modulation, but it was just fascinating. And I can say this, I'm a scientist. It was fascinating what was happening in her body. Again, we have the ability to, I can pull labs on a Thursday and a Tuesday and look and watch what's happening in the body. I'm watching a lot of her friends, though, go through not feeling well, not being well, creating a new homeostasis of dysfunction, right? Or lack of optimal health. I'm going to say that. Yeah. And in that, in our computational biology, in our genetics department, we're talking about what hormetic event can we get to happen in the body to come back into either a previous homeostasis or a homeostasis that helps the body level up from an energy production, from an inflammatory regulation, from an oxygen delivery. I mean, that's where we sit and think all day long. But I want to make sure, again, that everybody can start in the advocacy space and advocating for themselves, for their loved ones, for continuing education, for better research, for better funding. And so just to make sure I have that right, it's MEAction.net, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And Jaime, we will put the link to the paper that you worked. That's amazing. And also, really want to make sure that as an advocate for yourself and everybody out there listening, as you are your number one advocate, I want to make sure that you have resources that you can bring your caregivers and care providers so that you can help them level up in their partnership with you as you are working towards creating adequate diagnostics, care, therapy, and support. I mean, a lot of these individuals need support because, like you mentioned, a very large percentage have a difficult time carrying on full-time work out of the home, those types of things. And so, so the support system has to be in place. But Jaime, I want to thank you so much for being on. I love it. You're such a contributor to our institute, but also just to all those individuals out there that are struggling. We need you, and I thank you. And let's do more.
Absolutely. I can also be found on Twitter at exceedhergrasp1, as in a woman's reach should exceed her grasp.
I love it. So will you spell that one more? Will you spell that for me so I can make sure I get it right?
EXCEEDHERGRASP1, the number.
Awesome. Amazing. And that is on Twitter, right? Or X, I think we call it now.
Yes. And I hear the same on Blue Sky as well.
That's wonderful. And we will see you soon at our, we're working on an event. I love that we're going to be working together and doing
You guys are going to be working on the Teach ME, Treat ME stuff too. It's wonderful. In fact, I think that you all were the first group that I reached out to. So I really appreciate that.
We appreciate you. And Jaime, promise me you'll come back one more time.
Absolutely. I didn't even get to talk about MCAS or PANS and PANDAS. We got to do that sometime.
I want to do an entire show on PANS and PANDAS. We get a lot of letters about that and a lot of little kids. Recently, a lot of little kids that are totally misdiagnosed too. That's a hard one for me sometimes when we get those letters. Oh, they're all hard, but that's a really hard one for me personally.
It's really challenging when the little ones are so deeply affected. It's a bit different.
Yeah. Okay. We will talk soon. I will take you up. I'm having you back. I appreciate it. Again, we want to make sure that we spread hope and that we provide help and that that we are constantly pulling resources for you guys on behalf of you guys and because of you guys. So thank you again. And Jaime, we'll talk soon. See you soon.